Hey there everybody, Sage Popham here, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. And in this post, I want to share a little bit about some of the dynamics around the taste of herbs. You know, in traditional systems of medicine, the way an herb tastes, whether it's bitter or pungent or really astringent or sour or sweet, is a really strong indication of the medicinal properties of a plant. But as we know from a physiological perspective, certain tastes of herbs, especially bitters, actually tasting that flavor on your tongue is a really important attribute for actually the medicinal virtues being conveyed to the body. And so a question came up recently in regards to, someone maybe sweetening up an herb tea with some stevia or some honey. And if we add a whole bunch of things to an herbal formula that changes its taste, is that going to change the medicinal impact of that formula? So that is the topic of discussion for this week's post, and hopefully you learned something good from it. All right, question number 3 is coming from Laura. And Laura is asking, if a patient takes a bitter or pungent herbal tea or concoction for a digestive condition, but then adds a bunch of stevia to mask that strong bitter or pungent taste, ending up with a tea that tastes sweet and not bitter or pungent, will that somehow dilute the intended effect or send the wrong signal to the brain and organs? Will the tongue and digestive tract receptors register it as sweet and thereby weaken the resulting action intended with the originally prescribed herb? That's a really good question, Laura. Yeah, that is a really good question. So, different herbalists are probably going to answer this question very differently. I would say, so I'll do my best to show both sides of the equation here. I would say more of probably an old school traditional herbalist that really sees the importance of the actual taste of the herbs conveying the medicinal influence. Yes, adding a whole bunch of stevia to a bitter or pungent tea and making it sweet and no longer bitter is definitely going to take away from some of the medicinal properties. More of a biochemically oriented herbalist is going to say no, the herbs still have all of their biochemical constituents there, and regardless of whether they're actually tasting it as bitter or not, you're still going to get the medicinal effect. So which one's true? Well, I would say a little bit of both, right? And that's always me, right? I'm always like trying to see both sides of the equation. I don't necessarily think either one is necessarily right or wrong. I don't think that the herbs are going to completely be nullified by making an herbal formula taste sweet. I'm not sure it's going to be quite as strong as it would have been if it was at full bitter potency, right? So I definitely imagine that it will still have a medicinal effect, but I don't think it's going to be quite as strong as it would be if it were full strength. Now, that being said, I think your question brings up an important consideration here, though, in regards to client compliance. One of the biggest reasons a client doesn't take the herbs that you give them is, one, because it's too complicated, right? We give them way too much all at once and they get overwhelmed and then they don't do any of it. Or two, taste, right? They're just like, I can't take it. This just absolutely tastes awful. It's really hard for me to get down. So I would say a good herbalist will take that into consideration and try to adjust their protocols to make it more suitable for the client and their lifestyle and what they can actually do and tolerate. I don't think it's great for a clinician to be like, well, tough shit, choke it down. I don't care. You need to take this. I don't really think that works so much. Maybe for some people it does, but for most, probably not so much. So this is where, when you're administering a formula to a client, it's really important for you to listen to those things, right? If you're giving someone a really horrible tasting tea, maybe you need to adjust your herbs a little bit, right? Maybe you need to add a little bit of, say, some licorice root or whatever in there to make it a little more palatable so that they can take it. Or if it makes sense, you can compound those herbs as a tincture and have them put it in a little bit of water or whatever and take it that way. Basically, it comes down to figuring out a way to get them to take their herbs so that they'll have the desired medicinal effect. And it sounds like here, making it a little sweeter is gonna help that person. I would say add some licorice to that formula to make it a little sweeter, but not so much that it's totally trumping the bitter and or pungent flavor of the herbs. And this is where the dynamic of corrigents comes into herbalism, which are, herbs that are used to correct the energetics of a formula, but also to improve the palatability. So this is where sometimes things like, anise and fennel and peppermint and licorice and rose and, angelica root and, did I already say anise? Yeah, like those types of things can really help make a formula more palatable and therefore get it into people's bodies a little bit better. So I would encourage you, Laura, to really have a good conversation with your client and play around with your formula a little bit and try to work with them and find something that will work. Yeah, great question.